Hello, my name is Tatiana Wiet. I'm from the University of Edinburgh. In this presentation, I will present a descriptive analysis of floating suprasegmental components in Nuer. I will go straight into outlining the phenomenon. Some Nuer nouns have a floating suprasegmental component, henceforth FSC. FSC occurs at the left edge of nouns. It is realized only with the addition of the preceding vocalic context. Examples in 1 show the data from Lou Nuer dialect. In 1a, the noun child is an ordinary noun. It is preceded by a suffix vowel, which is normally low-toned and has a short vowel. In 1b, there is a noun dog person that has FSC. We can see that the preceding suffix vowel is now long and it has a rising tone. Here is how the sounds sound.
Hanana gat, hanana dog. Hanana gat, hanana dog.
Now, before I go into the description of FSC, some background information on Nuer is in order. Nuer is a Nilo-Saharan language of the Dinka Nuer subgroup, spoken in South Sudan and Ethiopia. It has two broad varieties: Western Nuer, spoken by the sections at the western part of the Nuer territory in South Sudan, and Eastern Nuer, spoken elsewhere in South Sudan and in Ethiopia. Within each variety, there are a number of dialects that loosely correspond to the Nuer sections. In this talk, I will focus on the South Sudanese Lou Nuer dialect, spoken over here. But I also will consider the data from the rest of the South Sudanese dialects, Bintiu, Gawar, and Nasser. Nuer has 20 consonant phonemes. The plosives and the nasals come in 5 places of articulation. There is a lateral, a trill, and 3 approximants. There are no fricative phonemes in Lou Nuer, the dialect which is the focus of this presentation. There are 22 vowel phonemes in Nuer, including 14 monophthongs and 8 diphthongs. Vowels differ in terms of vowel quality, height and backness, and in terms of voice quality. There are modal and breathy vowels. Breathy voice is signaled by a diacritic under the vowel. With diphthongs, both components of a diphthong agree in voice quality. All Nuer diphthongs are opening diphthongs. Now, there are 3 tonemes in Nuer: high, mid, and low, and there is a lot of allotony conditioned primarily by voice quality. There is a 3-way vowel length contrast in Nuer. Monophthongs and diphthongs can be phonemically short, long, or overlong. The table shows the average durations for the monophthongs and diphthongs. The durations for the short and long lengths are important for the purpose of the present discussion. With monophthongs, short vowels are about 94 milliseconds in duration, and long vowels are about 133 milliseconds in duration. A more tangential issue, we can see that the monophthongs on average are shorter than the diphthongs. For typographic reasons alone, the length of a diphthong is represented by the number of the graphemes corresponding to the second component of the diphthong. In phonetic terms, both elements of the diphthong are about of equal duration. The majority of Nuer words are monosyllabic, and morphology is expressed mostly by stem alternations, changes of the phonological material on the monosyllabic stem. The structure of stems is as follows. There is an initial consonant that can be followed by one of the 2 glides, followed by a vowel that can be short, long, or overlong, and there is usually a final consonant. In Nuer, there can be suffixes, but there are virtually no segmental prefixes. Now, back to the topic of this presentation, let us consider the realization of FSC by looking at the data from Lou Nuer. There are two effects observed on the preceding context: increase in vowel duration and change in tone. The context in 2a serves as a baseline here. The noun is an ordinary noun, and the preceding vowel is short and the tone on the vowel is low. By contrast, in 2b, before the noun with floating suprasegmental component, the vowel is long and the tone is a rise. Hear how the examples sound.
Hanana go. Hanana gor. Hanana go. Hanana gor.
The phonetic data shows that before the ordinary noun, the vowel is 89 milliseconds in duration, and before the noun with FSC, the vowel is 149 milliseconds in duration. Now recall that this durational difference corresponds to the differences between the contrastive short and long vowel lengths in Nuer. As for the tone, before the ordinary noun, the F0 is low level. Before the noun with FSC, the F0 is rising. Now, the nouns in these examples are high-toned. Thus, there is a possibility that the tone on the context before the noun with FSC is due to tone spreading. This, however, is not the case, as is evident from the examples where the FSC noun is low-toned. Now, examples in 3 show that the tonal effect is present even when the tone on the noun is low. This suggests that the high element of the vowel on the vowel here is not due to tone spreading, but that the FSC consists of a high tone. I will now play the 2 sound files.
Hanana gat. Hanana dog. Hanana gat. Hanana dog.
And here's the phonetic representation of the data. Again, there is a difference in the duration, and there is a difference in the tonal pattern before the ordinary noun and before the noun with FSC. All the examples that we have looked at so far have low tone preceding context. When the preceding context is high toned, as it is an example in form, there is again a vowel length effect. The vowel before the noun with FSC is longer than before the noun without FSC. But there is no tonal change. This is how the 2 sentences sound.
Han kwanya gat. Han kwanya dog. Han kwanya gat. Han kwanya dog.
We can hear that the vowel sounds longer before the noun with FSC than before the ordinary noun, but there is no audible tonal effect. Here is the phonetic representation of the relevant parts. We can see that the vowel is short in duration before the ordinary noun, and it is longer before the noun with FSC. As for the tone, we can see that in both panels, the F0 is high level. Hence, I say that in the context where the preceding vowel is high-toned, there is no tone change as the result of FSC. In answering the question about what is FSC composed of in Lou Nuer, I claim that the data from this dialect is inconclusive. Whilst there is a clarity with respect to the presence of the floating high tone, there is less clarity with respect to quantity. There are 2 possibilities. One is that the FSC consists of a mora and a high tone, and 2 is that it consists of a high tone alone, and mora is a byproduct of tone association but not is itself part of FSC. Let us explore each possibility in turn, taking into account evidence outside of the data from Lou Nuer. First, there is a diachronic evidence in support of the first hypothesis that quantity is part of FSC. In Nuer, all nouns start with a consonant. There are no nouns that start with a vowel, except for some place names. By contrast, in closely related languages such as Dinka and Rel, many nouns start with the prefix vowel a. A small caveat here is that, interestingly, in both Rel and Dinka, this initial vowel is said to be toneless. Now, the Nuer nouns that have the FSC are the cognates of the nouns that start with the vowel a in Dinka and Rel. The table shows the nouns with FSC in Nuer that have floating suprasegmental component here, and the Rel cognates. Observe that all the nouns in Rel start with the vowel a. For the Nuer data, I do not mark FSC at this stage, and this also reflects the realization of these nouns in isolation, the context in which the FSC is not overtly realized. Now, from the Rel data, we know that the initial vowel is a. All the data from Nuer that I have shown so far had the same vowel that lengthened, and it was the central vowel e. But other vowels also lengthen in context of FSC, as is evident from this example in 5. The quality of the lengthened vowel is that of the original non-lengthened vowel in these suffixes. So in the case of Lou Nuer, it is clear that it is the quantity alone that is being added. Let us now turn to consider the data from other Nuer dialects, which further support the hypothesis that floating quantity is part of FSC. The dialects in question are spoken in the western part of the Nuer territory. In those dialects, there is a homorganic nasal element that occurs at the left edge of the noun with FSC, but only when the preceding context is vocalic, as it is in example 6a. So here I'll play the sounds in 6a and 6b in turn. And again. Okay, so comparing the examples from Bintiu Nuer and Lou Nuer, we can see that the difference is in that the Lou Nuer has a long vowel in the preceding context, whereas Bintiu Nuer has a short preceding vowel and the nasal element. The high tone appears in both examples, but whereas in Lou Nuer it appears on the lengthened vowel, in 6a it is realized on the nasal component. In my view, the data from Bintiu and Gawar dialects shows the diachronic development whereby the vowel a became weakened and reduced to homorganic nasal. This supports the hypothesis that the quantity is part of FSC. Based on the realization of the FSC in the 3 dialects and on what is known about the diachronic development, we might expect that there is a floating mora and a floating high tone at the left edge of the FSC nouns, as is shown by the example for dog person here. The representation then could be as follows. The floating mora and high tone that occur at the left edge of the noun cross the word boundary and associate with the preceding context, as is shown here. Now, from the typological perspective, the ability for the floating quantity to cross word boundary is questionable. It has been attested in a closely related language Shilluk, where the floating quantity is said to occur at the right edge of words. But in general, however, for the floating quantity to associate a cross-word boundary is rare. By contrast, in words languages, floating tones often associate a cross-word boundary. So If we assume that the FSC consists of just a floating tone, the question we must address is where does the quantity come from? Now, there is a body of evidence showing that the presence of complex tone correlates with the longer durations. In languages with contrastive length, contour tones tend to be restricted to phonemically long vowels. This is true for Somali and Navajo, for example. In languages without contrastive length, there is often an increase in vowel duration to accommodate complex contour tones. According to Zhang, longer duration means higher tone-bearing ability. This brings us to the second hypothesis, that the FSC Nuer consists of a floating high tone alone. Under this analysis, we assume that each tone in Nuer must associate with a mora. We can then say that upon tone association with the preceding context, a mora slot is inserted to accommodate the tone. Now, evidence in support of this hypothesis comes from yet another Nuer dialect, Nasser Nuer. In Nasser Nuer, everything that I mentioned in relation to Lao Nuer also holds, but with one exception. The exception occurs in the context of the preceding high-toned syllable. Recall that in Lao Nuer, shown in 7b, in this environment there is vowel lengthening but no tonal change. In Nasser Nuer, shown in 7a, there is also no change in tone, but in addition, there is no vowel lengthening either. Instead, the vowel is short. I will now play the examples. Now, observe that the vowel in the noun is different in this dialect, but don't let that distract you from the difference in question, that is short versus long vowel before the noun.
And me other duck. And me other duck. And me other duck. And me other duck.
The Nasser data suggests that in sequences of high tones, one of those high tones gets deleted. The way to understand the absence of vowel lengthening in the preceding context is then to assume that the mora is needed as a placeholder for the complex tone. And when there is no complex tone due to the high tone deletion, there is no mora insertion needed. Now, I have shown that on the basis of the data from Lao Nuer, two interpretations are possible. One, that the FSC consists of a floating mora and a high tone, and two, that there is only a high tone. Data from Gawar and Bintiu Nuer possibly represents a stage where the vowel A is weakened and is realized as a homorganic nasal instead. On the other hand, data from Nasser Nuer suggests that the vowel only lengthens to accommodate complex tone. The question for the future, of course, is whether we should try to assume a unified analysis to account for the behavior of FSC in the Nuer dialects, or whether we can postulate a separate analysis to account for the differences. Now, to conclude, I have shown that some Nuer nouns have FSC. It occurs at the left edge of the nouns and is realized as vowel lengthening and tone change on the preceding vocalic context. FSC Nuer originates from the lost prefixal vowel A that is attested in related languages. Data from Nuer is inconclusive and suggests two possible interpretations. FSC consists of a mora plus high tone, or FSC consists of a high tone alone. Now, number one is a plausible interpretation from the point of view of the diachronic development and is supported by the data from Gawar and Bintiu Nuer. Under the floating high tone analysis, vowel lengthens in order to accommodate complex tone and can be formalized as a mora insertion, that is, mora is a placeholder for tone. This analysis is further supported by data from Nasser Nuer. I would like to thank my Nuer speakers, Rebecca, Jima, and Yaboth. Thank you to the Leverhulme Trust for supporting this research. And thank you to Bertram Eisen, Bob Latt, Mirella Bloom, Priscilla Lam for commenting on the presentation. Below is the list of the references. Thank you for listening.